Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network, presented by FanDuel. And joining me in this one is USA Today's Rockets Wire and ClutchFans YouTube channels co-host Ben DuBose. Great to see you, Ben, but I wish the Rockets weren't coming off their worst loss of the season. They looked either, tired or disinterested Monday in Utah. And although tired, it's kind of a weak excuse at this point after the long rest leading up to this game and the blowout the night before. But do you like resting Steven Adams on the second of a back-to-back instead of the first one when the rotation's a little bit more well-rested?
Yeah, I think that's something that, especially going into this weekend with another back-to-back against the Suns and the Mavericks, that's a conversation that Ime Udoka and his staff need to have, because I think, especially with the teams they're playing, the double big started last year because they needed Steven Adams to guard Anthony Davis. And so assuming he's playing for Dallas, and Dallas had an impressive win on Monday night over Denver, so they're not a pushover despite what the record would tell you. Yeah, I could see using him on night two, providing a little bit more juice if the team overall is worn down. And Robert, I don't have any major concerns coming out of that Utah game, because it's not like they found any, secret way to attack the Rockets. There's a reason Houston beat the same squad by 30, or at one point it was 37 on Sunday. I think a lot of it just comes down to effort. But look, on paper, this is a Houston team that you do worry about on back-to-backs. The best player is 37 years old. One of your best players, Steven Adams, is 32 and needs to be load managed. At the moment, they're very short when it comes to their projected rotation. There's no Tari, there's no Dorian Finney-Smith, there's no Fred VanVleet, although we knew that going into training camp. So they're short on bodies. Two of your most impactful players, including your best, are guys that are in their second decade in the league. And in the case of KD, almost his third decade. This is the type of team that on paper you worry about being a little bit worse on back-to-backs because they don't have the juice. And Reed Sheppard against the Jazz, I thought he was targeted a lot defensively and he wasn't good. But I also think Reed's the type of guy, especially if you start him, you hope that those other four players who are all very good defensively can help him overcome whatever issues that he has. And they weren't able to do that last night, I think, because just across the board, they looked a little lethargic. They looked a little out of sorts, at least for the first 34 minutes. They turned it on late. So I just think on paper, this is a Rockets team that you don't want to draw any firm conclusions based on the first back-to-back. I think they have 13 for the season overall, but it's not a great sign. Like, it's not necessarily a fatal flaw, because obviously there's no back-to-backs in the playoffs. It's even more spread out, the schedule, when it matters most. But for the regular season, this is an older team. It's one that at the moment is short on depth. On paper, it doesn't surprise me that they might be a little bit worse on back-to-backs. And it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, because there's been this talking point. I've mentioned it myself that to start the year, the Rockets had one of the toughest schedules. I think going into this Utah back-to-back, they were at number 4 in strength of schedule, and then the rest of the way, they were at number 30, the easiest in the entire league. Well, those metrics do not include back-to-backs. That's strictly based on who you've played, the records, and home and away. So the schedule is not as easy as you might think when you factor in the back-to-backs, and so that's not going to derail the season. They're still 13-5. They're still on a pace to win 60 games, but it is something that, given the age of the team, given the current injuries, that I'm a little worried about, especially in the very short term leading into this back-to-back against the Suns and Mavs this weekend.
Yeah, you led me right into what I wanted to ask you about, because the back-to-backs really don't hit until January the 22nd when they have, I want to say, 6 of them in the next 2 months. At that point, you hope to have Tari and Finney-Smith back by then, which leads me to this question. Is there hope that we see Finney-Smith before January, specifically before Tari's timeline for a return? Because it would sure be nice to have both of those guys leading into that whole January stretch.
This is mostly me guessing, but I think Tari comes back first, simply because the injury was projected to be 4 to 6 weeks, and we're already 2.5 weeks into that stint. This stretch coming up where, because of the NBA Cup, the schedule gets very spaced out. Between the 6th and the 18th, they have just 2 games. So I think in the middle of that window will be the 4-week checkpoint. And then, assuming Tari is cleared, he'll need a few practices to get his legs back underneath him, but they'll have a lot of practice time in there. And so I think it's realistic that before Christmas, Tari comes back, assuming all goes well on that 4-week checkup that will probably be towards the latter stages of next week. And I also think because it's an oblique, he's probably a little bit closer to full conditioning. Like he was already at an NBA level of conditioning prior to getting hurt. And I think because it's not a leg injury, maybe he's not all out sprinting, but I think he's able to stay in better shape. As opposed to DFS, coming off the ankle surgery and having not played NBA basketball since April because the Lakers were eliminated in the first round, I think there's going to be a longer ramp up. I just think between Tari having the shorter ramp up process, it not being a lower leg, and the fact that there's a concrete timetable, like they said 4 to 6 weeks. Well, 4 weeks is going to be coming up in about 10 days. My money would be on Tari coming back first. And even if they start ramping up at the same time, I think Tari's ramp is likely to be a little bit shorter. So I wouldn't rule out DFS before January, but he's probably going to need a couple of weeks of building up through contact practices before they're ready to turn him loose in NBA games. And so at this point, for me, with that ramp up process not having started, at least not to our knowledge, I lean to DFS being Christmas or later. Whereas I think Tari Eason, assuming it heals as they expect, will likely be able to come back, I'd say maybe a week or so before Christmas.
I just don't understand this part, Ben. And you talk to some of the guys with the Rockets. Maybe you have an answer to this. Typically, doctors have some sort of timeline for guys coming back. We got a timeline as soon as Tari got injured that they were going to at least evaluate him in 4 to 6 weeks. Why has there been literally zero timeline with Finney-Smith?
It's touch and go depending on how he feels. And the only people that truly know are DFS and the trainers. Like Ime has certainly an idea, but this is one of those situations where, like with the Astros, everybody gets frustrated with lack of transparency over the years. But one of the problems is Joe Espada is having to do sort of the translating when the person we would like to get answers from was Jeremiah Randall, who now is gone. But I think you know where I'm going with that analogy. Like it's tough when the coach or the manager is put in as the middleman when he doesn't have the expertise. And, maybe he doesn't want to fully know so that he doesn't have to answer those questions on the record. But either the trainer or the player, but the player isn't available when he's hurt. There's just a lot of vague updates. He's working. We do see him on the side at practices. It's not like he's in hiding. He's around the team. So I don't think, at least not to my knowledge, there's been a setback or that there's any big secret. The surgery was done in June and the Rockets signed him at the start of July. So they knew it. They were able to look at the medicals before they signed him. So I don't think there's anything huge that we're unaware of. I'm sure they have some tests that they're running and they're constantly doing imaging, but some of it also comes down to, how Dorian tells them he's feeling when he does these drills. And it's tough to say exactly when until he gives them the green light, until the trainer signs off on that green light. And Ime, he's not a doctor. He has some medical expertise, but I don't think he necessarily wants to speak out of turn. So it just leads to this frustrating situation where I get why fans want answers. I want answers myself. But as long as it's only a couple of months, and I know I'm sort of moving the goalpost on this, because if you had told me in October that we'd be talking about Christmas or later for DFS, I wouldn't have believed you. So I know I'm doing a little bit of mental gymnastics here. But at the end of the day, if he's back before the midway point of the year, he has plenty of time to ramp up before the playoffs and get back to himself. I can live with it, especially with them playing as well as they are now. And the other point that I would raise with DFS, this isn't some sort of secretive injury that is just much worse than people know. No, it's a maintenance thing. The way it was described by the Rockets is that it was very similar to Jae'Sean Tate in that both of these guys played on it the last couple of years. It just got to a point where they said, hey, we should have a cleanup to get this sorted out so we can feel better moving forward. So I don't think it's any sort of catastrophic injury. The Rockets knew it when they signed him. And perhaps the Tate thing, keep in mind, the Rockets framed those two surgeries as being very similar in nature. Tate came back and he was not himself at all. Like, they actually sent him back down to the G League to get in better shape, to get in better rhythm. And to Tate's credit, he actually came back. And I think the first game he played major minutes in since coming back was Monday night against the Jazz. And he looked really good. He was a big part of how they almost rallied from that 21-point deficit to win the game. And so I could see from a Rockets standpoint, obviously DFS is a much more important player in the grand scheme than Tate is. I think maybe they brought Tate back a little bit early. And so I could see that being sort of a cautionary tale for, let's give him a little bit more time and not rush him back the way they probably did with Tate, who came back clearly before he was ready.
One underrated Steven Adams storyline is his incredible free throw shooting. And while Amen's jump is definitely a big deal, Adams going from 46.2% last year, 53.7 for his career, to 77.5 this year. It's pretty shocking. Normally, you just write it off as small sample size, Ben. But did his 9 of 10 performance Sunday, did that convince you? And is his major shooting form metamorphosis? I mean, if you look at Steven Adams' stats, had a great shot of, you could really tell what the difference
Yep.
is. Is that making you a believer as well?
Yeah. And at this point, it's not a massive sample by any means, but he's at 40 free throws for the season. That's not totally insignificant either. I really like that you're highlighting this because it's more than just the free throws that he makes in a given game. Like for the season, he's averaging, I believe, 2.7 per game. And there's some people that are undoubtedly going to say, why are we talking about this? It's not just the free throws that he makes and adding a couple of points in a given game, which, some of these close games, it can make the difference, but it's also how it changes the way defenses think about defending the Rockets, and that it takes Haka Adams off the table if he's shooting nearly 80% the way he is now. But it also helps the Rockets, like if he's making free throws at that rate, then the Rockets are a team that gets into the bonus typically very quickly because of how big and physical they are. It might make a lot of defenses think twice about wrapping him up and sending him to the line. And so because of that, you're probably going to get better shots for the team overall, either from Steven trying to put it back up himself or maybe kicking it back out to somebody else. I did a YouTube with Dave Hardesty, editor of ClutchFans, after that Jazz loss, and Dave made the point, and I think he's right. This team's superpower is the offensive rebounding, and that's neutered when Steven isn't out there. And so if he's making free throws, then you're making that superpower even greater, because I think there's more of an opportunity for those offensive rebounds to lead to good shot attempts for the Rockets, because defenses aren't going to be quite as willing to send Steven to the line, dare him to make two. And if they do, then he's more likely to make them. But it's not just the free throws that he makes, it's the trickle-down effects, how it should get the Rockets better opportunities overall. And it's something that, look, without Steven last night, the Rockets lost the rebounding battle against the Jazz by 4. The game previous, they beat the Jazz by 17. And I think Steven had like 12 and 17 minutes. He is a massive presence on the glass. He is very important to what they do. Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun are very, very good players. They're all NBA level players. I don't think either is an MVP candidate. If this team has a superpower on offense, it's not any transcendent individual talent. Those are very good talents, but they're not to the level of, Jokic, SGA, Giannis, at least not yet. The superpower right now is the offensive rebounding, the sheer totality of possessions that the Rockets are able to generate. And so Steven making more free throws, beyond just adding a point or two here or there, if it makes teams a little more reluctant to foul him, if it takes Haka Adams out of play, which will make Ime Udoka more likely to trust Adams for more minutes and high leverage minutes at that, then overall the trickle-down effects are significant, because it enhances what was already the strength of this team, and that's crashing the offensive glass.
Yeah, and you made the perfect point there at the end, which I was going to piggyback on, which was just the fact that Adams is somebody that everybody just thinks that they can jump on his back if they can't block him out.
Exactly.
So they could send him to the free throw line. You wrote on Rockets Wire about VanVleet's hope to play this year. He brought it up in his new podcast. Did you find any evidence of NBA players who can recover that quickly from an ACL injury, especially with no ramp up going into playoff basketball, real serious stuff?
The closest parallel that I can come up with, Amari Rodgers, when he was at Clemson, came back in 6 months in 2019. Now, I know he's a little bit younger and football isn't basketball, but there is a similar stop-start element, especially for wide receivers. So it's hard to believe, but we are seeing around the league these timetables get expedited a little bit. There was the report from, I believe, Brian Windhorst a week or so ago that if it was the playoffs, Kyrie Irving would be playing for the Mavs, and he's 8 months out. It's unlikely, but medical technology and science is improving by the year, so I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think there's anything new on Fred, but I was told when that injury happened that it would be premature to write him out for the year, that everybody knows the odds, everybody knows the history, but Fred's not the most explosive vertically or shifty side-to-side guy to begin with. He's out there primarily for his shooting, his leadership, his communication, being the quintessential floor general. And while I don't think if he returns, it's realistic to see 30 to 35 minutes per game starting level Fred, the way Rockets fans got used to the last couple of years, I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility, especially if the Rockets advance in the playoffs, that, yeah, maybe he can come back and be a 15, 20 minutes per game guy off the bench. There'll certainly be a psychological boost to that. He should be able to shoot really well. Would I bet on it? No, but I'm told both from the Rockets' perspective and from Fred's perspective, there's a reason why they didn't rule him out for the season. They are hopeful that, especially if this team is as good as we would like them to be and makes a deep playoff run, that he can return. And, there's some asterisks you got to put on that. Again, it's out of line with historical precedent. And if he does return, no, I don't think you're going to get the Fred from the last 2 years. You won't have that version until next fall. But I don't think it's entirely crazy, especially if the Rockets can play well into May, which would be 8 months from the date at which he tore the ACL, that he could return. I don't think it's likely, but I also don't think it's implausible. And so I think it's just an aspirational goal, as Fred said on his podcast. And hopefully the Rockets will know more by, I don't know if they'll tell us, but hopefully they'll know more by around the start of February, because I think by the time you get to February 1st, which will be the week before the trade deadline, and that's when all the activity opens up around the league and the calls are being made, then I think you do want to know going into the trade deadline window, how realistic is it for Fred to potentially come back? They won't know 100% that he's coming back. I mean, they could know 100% that he's not, but you can sort of factor that into your decision making, because at that point you'll be within 2.5 months or so of the playoffs, and I think you'd have a better idea by that point if he's anywhere near starting to ramp up and test it out a little bit. So bottom line, I don't expect it. Gun to my head, I would bet no, simply based on the history of ACL injuries, but it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. And both the Rockets and Fred are still, keeping hope alive.
Yeah, I just want to ask our listeners, viewers, what do you guys feel about the possibility of Fred coming back? Any of the topics that we've hit so far, or the stuff that we're about to hit, because we got more coming up, but let us know in the YouTube comments. And for you Texans junkies, Thursday, I've got a Chiefs Insider coming on to preview the Sunday game, and make sure that you watch the Texans Colts post-game show on the live YouTube tab or on the audio feed if you missed it. Houston radio legend Jason Braddock and the bullpen co-host Tom Chavarria help me break down the games every week. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube with notifications so you can get updates on the live shows and all the content. Also subscribe, of course, on your favorite podcast app. All right, Ben, before I hit you with more Rockets, I know you follow the Texans as well, as shown by what you're wearing. And I'm just curious how you feel about the Chiefs game Sunday, because our friends at FanDuel favor the Chiefs by 3.5 points. Do you think the Texans pull off the upset, or at least cover, I guess, for everybody going up on FanDuel and checking that out?
I'm a glutton for punishment, and this will probably age poorly, but I'm going to pick the Texans to pull off the straight off upset. If I didn't have the emotional attachment, if I was looking at it as an outsider, I think the Texans are due against the Chiefs for the breaks to go their way. Like, I don't think it's a bad matchup. You look at the two from the last month of last season, the regular season, they were right there until the Tank Dell injury. And in the playoffs, I think they outgained the Chiefs, I want to say like 340 yards to 210, something like that. They didn't finish drives well. They had a very unfriendly whistle, I thought, or unfriendly flags, I Bleav you'd call it in the NFL. You saying unfriendly whistle as an NBA guy. Point is, I don't think the officiating was in their favor. They outplayed the Chiefs overall. I don't think it's a bad matchup, and that's before we go into the fact that this year's Chiefs team is not the same as last year's, and I think the Texans defense is better. You'd be foolish to count out the Chiefs. There's a reason they're favored. They're going to be a desperate team. But I also think that them, especially being favored by 3.5, if I had to make a prediction, I'd go with the Texans, but the safer one would be taking the Texans plus 3.5. That leaves you a little bit of wiggle room in case, Harrison Butker makes a high leverage kick late. Maybe the Chiefs escape by 2 or 3 points. But a lot of the line comes down to the mystique factor of the Chiefs at home with Patrick Mahomes, night game against a team they've historically dominated. But if you look a little bit closer, if you look underneath the hood, the Texans have been very competitive in their last couple of matchups with the Chiefs. They've been close. If I didn't have the emotional connection, I'd probably be more authoritative in saying, hey, like the Texans, they're on the ascent. The Chiefs are on the decline. The Texans are due for some breaks to go their way. I don't want to fully buy into that because hashtag Houston sports. I've been traumatized by the Chiefs and Pat Mahomes over the years, but logically, I think that the Texans are trending in the right direction and they should be due for a bounce to go their way in a way that it didn't in those 2 games late last season.
All right, let's get back to Rockets. Looks like Reed Sheppard's definitely a starter now, unless Udoka sees a matchup that he doesn't particularly like. And I'm wondering if he's maximized Ben as a starter, since so much of the offense is Durant and Şengün to start the game. They don't tend to run much for Reed Sheppard, and he defers his offense when he plays with those two guys. Do you optimize him more in bench units? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm torn. I think for this week, my preference would be, with the schedule being fairly friendly, would be to keep starting Reed just to get more data points. Because even with Reed struggling last night, the Rockets still should have won that game, Robert. If they had their normal juice defensively, if they took the game seriously in the first 34 minutes, even with Reed struggling defensively, some of that I think is the team construct not being as strong as it was the day before. And Reed, a lot of his threes, they missed short. Well, across the board, the Rockets had a lot of shots that were short runs, which typically indicates fatigue being an issue. But against a team like the Jazz, and I think the same can be said for the Kings and maybe the Mavs, although the Mavs are tougher with Anthony Davis, the Rockets have enough of a buffer. I think you can gather more data points on how Reed functions alongside the starters. And then, you can sort of compare and contrast. Here's the version of Reed you had when he was higher usage off the bench. Here's how he fit as more of a complementary piece alongside the 4 entrenched starters. And then as the schedule gets more difficult, starting the 15th of December, you've got 2 road games in Denver, the 15th and the 20th. You've got the Lakers on Christmas. You've got the Cavaliers right after Christmas. And a lot of those games are going to be on the road. That's the point where I think you need to be a little more cutthroat in terms of trying to optimize every minute, every margin when it comes to how you deploy your rotations. Right now, like, there's a lot of value if Fred isn't able to come back. And as we just talked about, I think that's the odds-on likely scenario. Then it behooves the Rockets to find out exactly what the limits of Reed Sheppard are so that they can factor that into their decision-making at the trade deadline in early February. He's looked good as a 6-man. How does it hold up in a starting role if you think you might need that? If it looks like you want Amen Thompson to play a little bit more off ball, or at least to have that option, so you want another ball handler in the starting lineup, I think it'd be good in the long term for the Rockets to get more data points, see how Reed functioned. Like, Monday against the Jazz wasn't great, but Sunday looked very good. Like, he wasn't high usage, but he had 6 stocks, tied his career high with 4 steals, made 50% of his shots. Kevin Durant complimented him after the game for how he had full command of the offense. There's a lot of benefits, both in the micro and the macro, to the Rockets getting more information on Reed used in different ways. It's just there's a balance between that and needing to win games and not costing yourself wins in the standings just for this potential of learning more information, because certainly the Rockets are in a win now mode with a 37-year-old Kevin Durant as their best player. So my preference would be, it hasn't all been bad with Reed in the starting lineup. Sunday, it actually looked really good. My preference would be, with these games all coming in quick succession, they're in a stretch now with 5 games in 7 days, keep it the way it's been the last few games. And then as you get to this spread out version where, I mentioned between the 6th and the 18th, you have only 2 games. That's also when the schedule will get more difficult. Then that's where you look back and say, okay, what have we learned? What do we think we need to match up with the Nuggets, the Lakers, the Cavs, teams like that? And then you can make the harder decision at that point as far as, whether it makes sense to push Reed back to a bench role and start either Okogie or Steven Adams.
A couple of things. You look at the point guard situation this year with the Rockets. I just want to make note that they only are averaging a little bit over one more turnover this year than they did last year without Fred. So congratulations to the Rockets for doing that. Connecting to the approaching NBA trade season, because we've brought it up a couple of times. Is there any realistic type of player, Ben, or just type of trade the Rockets may look at, considering, number one, Reed Sheppard's emergence, VanVleet's no trade? Also, I've just kind of wondered if they can add a 15th man for depth by breaking up the Finney-Smith contract into 2 players. Like, that could be an option, especially if you feel like there are health concerns with Finney-Smith moving forward.
Or you could move Clint Capella, because I think by the trade deadline, 2/3 of the season will already be gone. And Capella is a regular season signing. He's to give you insurance for Steven Adams over the grind of 82 games. I don't think he's going to play much, if at all, in the playoffs, assuming both Alperen Şengün and Steven Adams are healthy. By the way, we talked earlier about the rebounding advantage flipping. Şengün's averaging just 5.6 rebounds his last 5 games. He needs to get better at that because I think for whatever reason he hasn't been quite as physical. So hopefully against some weaker opponents he can fatten up in the coming days. But I think Capella is someone where the majority of his value is going to be realized in the regular season. I don't think he's necessarily a playoff guy. So I could see that $7 million figure being used to target someone that might be a little bit more of a playoff option. I think it largely depends on what we see from Reed over the next 2 months. It's the point guard position. Like, it's not the eyesore that it was in the preseason when Fred had just gotten hurt and there were all these questions around Amin and Reed. But it'd be foolish to say after 18 games that it's case closed, they've got this figured out. Like, they're still trying to figure out how to best optimize Amin. How much can you play him on ball versus off? And what does he need to get the efficiency back to, last year he was a 60% true shooting guy. To this point, I think he's still below 55. How much can you play Amin on ball without it compromising his efficiency? Not saying it's totally linked to that, but I don't think it's entirely separate either. And then with Reed, there's the questions of how he's going to hold up defensively, especially if you want to talk about playing him 25, 30 minutes a night, and then he has to play against starters some. How can he function as a point guard, or does he need to be off ball? We know he likes to be a catch and shoot guy. So there's all these questions, and that's why, to go back to the question you just asked me, that's why I'm in favor of starting Reed for a little bit longer to learn more information. But those are questions. And so if you don't have the answers internally, when I look at this roster, like right now, the parachute is Aaron Holiday, break glass in case of emergency guy. But I don't think you want Aaron Holiday to potentially be a 25 plus minutes per game player in the playoffs. And he hasn't been playing that. But what I mean by that is if it's a matchup where Reed is too up and down and you're worried, at 21 years old, year 2, is he going to hold up defensively? And Amin, maybe you just come to the conclusion that he needs to be used off ball to get back to who he was as a sophomore. Then Aaron Holiday is a very good option to have at the end of your bench. But there's a reason why he wasn't in the rotation to start the year. And so if you think you're in a position where Aaron might be needed for 25-ish minutes per game the way he was on Monday night in Utah, I don't think a contender wants to go into the playoffs, no disrespect to Aaron Holiday, having that as a feasible option. And so, the potential return of Fred plays into that as well. By the way, I really don't think the implied no trade for Fred is as big of a deal as a lot of people think. If he's not playing this year anyway, why does it matter to him whose bench he's sitting on? He can become a free agent next offseason if he wants. If it's a non-contender, guys in Fred's status in the league, 32 years old, good but not great player, get buyouts all the time.
You think, though, without the Rockets who have this value on him, do you think he can make back the money? The money that he's making next year on his player option, you think for him, he looks at it as though, yeah, I'm going to get this 25 million a year, and I might not get 25 million a year going forward. So that player option, just having that, I don't want that on a team like the Wizards or so, if they train. I'm just giving an example, but just like something like that.
No, I know what you mean. It would limit his market, but I think from Fred's perspective, he's going to pick up that option no matter what, because coming off the ACL and with a limited body of work this year, he's going to pick up that option. I think you may as well just consider it a 2-year contract. I don't think it's feasible that he opts out. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that, if it was a terrible situation, he would have the option. But more realistically, yeah, I think he would opt in. Players in his situation, if it's a bad team and he's on an expiring 1-year deal, get bought out all the time. Just look at John Wall as an example a couple of years ago. He had to wait until the final year of his contract, but he actually got the buyout before the season. So I think that would be an option. I think the reason I don't think Fred gets traded, it's not so much that Fred would block the deal, it's that the Rockets themselves still really value Fred as a player. It's not just about this season. Like, the Rockets are all about having a blueprint that extends, for multiple years. The phrase you hear out of Toyota Center more than anything else is sustainable contender. They're not going to just move Fred for the sake of moving him. The other team would actually have to value him positively. Otherwise, the deal just isn't going to make sense to the Rockets. So that would be the problem with moving Fred, is that, maybe there's a team that really likes likes him as a player and would want to have him around and would value him for next season. But the Rockets, they're not going to use him as salary filler, and they're not going to use him as, say, a neutral to negative asset just to match salaries. No, like, there are worse scenarios to the Rockets than trusting Reed Sheppard this year, seeing how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, then you bring Fred back for training camp, and they think his game is going to age really well. So I think that's why a Fred deal is unlikely. It's not so much that he would block it. It's more the Rockets aren't going to move him just to move him. They don't weight this season all that heavily. They want to have a sustainable contender moving forward. And Fred is 100% part of that blueprint. They're not going to move him just to move him. And that's why I think, a deal, as you mentioned, I think it'd be more likely on the smaller side. You mentioned Dorian. I mentioned Capella. Can't totally rule out Tari Eason after they didn't come to terms on an extension before the year, but something along those lines. I just think that the Fred deal, it's not so much the no trade, it's that the deal would have to make sense value-wise for both teams, and I don't know if that's going to happen because the Rockets really like Fred, and I could see a lot of other teams around the league saying, hey, we don't know about this guy. He might not fit if it's a rebuilding team, and even if it's a team that likes him, they might view the injury as, especially at 32 years old, something that caps his value because there's uncertainty until he plays of exactly how he's going to return. But the bottom line is, regardless of who you move or how you create the room from, that hard cap at the first apron, I think it's the point guard position and the Aaron Holiday test. To me, that's what this is all going to come down to. Aaron Holiday is a nice piece to have at the end of your bench, but I don't think if the Rockets go into early February and they're still so uncertain about Reed and Amen that they think they might need Aaron for 25 minutes the way they did against the Jazz, then that's a position they probably need to upgrade, especially relative to, a luxury third string center like Clint Capella that you're probably not going to need in the playoffs.
Putting health aside, because you can always say that's a concern, are there any regular season Rockets concerns that you have right now?
For me, it's the depth. We talked about it earlier, but this team, especially when games get more condensed or the schedule gets more condensed, not having Tari Eason, not having Dorian Finney-Smith, it hurts. Like that game last night against the Jazz, when it looked like they were sleepwalking early, even though they were winning, I didn't like how they played. Amen Thompson, Josh Okogie were putting up some bad shots. They weren't driving and attacking the rim. To me, that was a game that screamed for Tari Eason, where he comes off the bench, he plays frenetic chaos style, and can sort of get the Rockets out of the mud. And they don't have it. No disrespect to Jae'Sean Tate, who did play well in those minutes, but he's not going to be the same guy, especially against upper echelon teams, which the Rockets are going to play more of as they get to the middle and latter parts of December. So yeah, the depth is getting really tested, especially as the back-to-backs become more prevalent, as you mentioned. So they need those two guys back. And if for some reason they don't come back, then yeah, I don't think you want to necessarily be trusting Jae'Sean Tate and Clint Capella to the extent they have to right now, because there's just not really another choice the way the team is built. I think you need more shooting. You need more length. You might need more ball handling, depending on what you think of Aaron Holiday. Depth across the board is for the regular season where this team with the injuries really needs help. Hopefully they don't need to address it again. It's tough to say anything concrete because in terms of the trade deadline, look, hopefully Tari and Dorian Finney-Smith are back by then and playing well. Hopefully Reed and Amen continue to play well, and you don't need a point guard, and you feel like that position is set. But there's enough uncertainty now between the sample size, how young Reed is, the injury unknowns with Tari, and especially DFS, to where I don't think they desperately need a move at any spot right now, but they easily could need a move by January, depending on how these other things shake out.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, and I always talk about this when you talk about depth. It matters in the regular season because you don't want to wear down particular guys, like KD getting 40 minutes on the second of a back-to-back last night that you lost because you were in panic mode because you didn't have the depth to begin with. That's all part of the equation. Ben, let everybody know how they can connect with you and find all your stuff.
Ben DuBose on all the main social networks, rocketswire.usatoday.com for all the daily written coverage, and then the ClutchFans YouTube page for our not quite every game, but fairly frequent game recaps. ClutchFans YouTube, myself and Dave Hardesty do a 20 to 30-minute show after, I'll say, most Rockets games. We'll have some more later this week.
You guys do a great job. Of course, David's just a master in the Rocket space. Before we go, I just want to thank our friends at FanDuel, FanDuel.com, the place to go, or download the FanDuel app. Thanks again, Ben, and love all the time and the insight that you always give us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.